Здравейте, уважаеми зрители! Ето ни във втората част на разговора с доктор Пол Крейг Робъртс. Mr. Roberts, in the previous interview that we have made a month or two ago, then you were explaining that some, or maybe most of the European and the world leaders right now, they are puppets. And they are people that are doesn't make decisions. They are only following some kind of decisions that are made by other people. Right now we are seeing that the decisions they have chosen and they have made as a rules are not the best for Europe, not the best for United States, maybe better for Russia and China. We'll see in the future, but the main question here is about the war in Ukraine. Yesterday you have published one very interesting article, and I want to start with the question that you are asking in this article. Are the peace negotiations leading anywhere we want to go, or are they leading nowhere, or even worse, to more conflicts? And perhaps not only Europe, but all over the world.
Yes. Well, I said that if I had to bet, I would bet on one of the last two. Not that we're going somewhere good, but we're going nowhere or we're going to more conflict. And I gave various reasons. For example, in the Ukrainian so-called peace negotiations, President Trump keeps introducing extraneous factors. The first extraneous factor he introduced into the negotiations was Washington wants Ukraine's rare earths. Now, what has this got to do with ending a conflict? And then the next extraneous factor that Trump introduced was we also want to control the pipeline that delivers Russian natural gas to Europe. Well, what does this have to do with ending the conflict? So when you get a negotiation polluted with all sorts of extraneous issues, it breaks down. What is the real issue? Ending the conflict, or getting control of the pipeline and the rare earths and so on. We don't know what the next extraneous issue will be introduced. We also see that the Kremlin, Putin, the Russian President Putin, is continuing to honor the limited ceasefire, which requires neither side to attack the energy infrastructure of the other country. Well, the Russians have honored this, and the Ukrainians had attacked Russian infrastructure a dozen or more times. So here we have an agreement in which only one party is keeping it. And yet Trump keeps demanding that Russia accept a total ceasefire. Well, if the other side won't even abide by a partial ceasefire, why should Putin expect them to abide by a total ceasefire? So the whole approach doesn't make much sense. And my own opinion is I don't understand, well, I do understand, I figured it out, but for a while I didn't understand why Putin would even agree to a negotiation. You see, the purpose of a war leader is to win the war and dictate the terms of peace. So why is Russia refusing this role? Why does Putin refuse his right role, which is to win the war and dictate the peace outcome. Instead, ever since he began this conflict, he has repeatedly said, I'm willing to negotiate, I'm willing to negotiate, I'm willing to negotiate. He bleats that constantly. So does the foreign minister. And I got to thinking, why has Putin permitted a war that should have been won in 3 weeks to go on for longer than 3 years? And the answer, I think, I may be wrong, but I think the answer is Putin is using the conflict to get a negotiation that he hopes will produce a great power agreement, a new Yalta, a new understanding with the West, a new accommodation with the West. That, I think, is the reason Putin has refused to let the war be won. If you look at it, it's clear that he has refused to win the war. We had first Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, the most effective fighting force the Russians had. Prigozhin said, how come we're taking casualties? Why aren't we permitted to win? We want to fight. We want this over with. What are we taking casualties for nothing? And it got so bad that some of the Wagner Group troops marched on Moscow in a protest. It was not a rebellion. It was simply a protest. The Russian general staff, very jealous of Prigozhin and his superior fighting force, said, oh, Putin is a rebellion, do something. And so they destroyed their most effective force. Well, we saw the same thing again with the leader of the Chechnya force, the Muslim force that's in fighting for Russia and Ukraine. This leader also said, hey, what's going on here? Why can't we get this war with? Why can't we be allowed to fight? We're here to win a war, not take casualties. He also complained. So we have seen this from inside the conflict. And if you look at this conflict, it's now older. It's an older conflict than it took Stalin and the Red Army to clear the German Wehrmacht out of thousands of miles of Russia, Eastern Europe, and enter the streets of Berlin. That was done in less time, and Putin has cleared a very few kilometers of Donbass of Iranian troops. So how do we explain this? The only explanation, I think, is that he's kept the war going, hoping for negotiations that will become a new Yalta. And if you read Russian commentators on foreign affairs, that's what they're talking about, a new Yalta. We need a new Yalta. They're not going to get one.
They're not going to get.
No.
No, I see right now there is a new way of speaking from the European leaders. They're trying to make a new military defense union, I can say, like NATO, but without NATO, without the United States. And one word is very dangerous, I think. All the time on the news, the leaders are saying we need to make NATO and the European military union more deadly. That means that it's something is telling us that the worst part is not yet here.
Well, there is that danger. My own view is that Europe can do nothing to exist as a military counterpart to Russia. It hasn't the capability.
So that's just talking.
Well, it's talking. I think it's encouraged by Putin's appearance of being irresolute. You know, Putin, by letting a war go on that should not have gone on, Putin has created the impression of himself in the West as an irresolute person who simply is so averse to war that he won't fight. And so this impression has caused even the militarily impotent British and French to talk about sending their troops to Ukraine to fight Russia. Well, this is absurd. Britain and France have zero capability of confronting Russia. It's an absurdity, and it's brought on by Putin creating the impression that he's scared to death of fighting and would rather negotiate than win a war. And this is the impression Putin has caused in the West. This is the way he's seen. He's a guy, he simply won't fight. He keeps talking about all of these weapons they have, and they do have an impressive array of weapons. But nobody in the West believes he would use them. Mm-hmm. So his constant bleeding, almost pleading for negotiations. And you see, he's continuing to abide by an agreement when no one else is abiding by the agreement. He's going through the same thing he went through with the Minsk agreement. For 8 years, the West deceived him.
Yep.
And he was willing to be deceived for 8 years because he wanted to avoid conflict. So he's created the impression that however powerful militarily Russia is, he's not going to use it. and therefore, it destroys his negotiating ability. He simply has destroyed his own negotiating ability because he's no credibility. So this is a terrible consequence. But he did it out of good intentions, but it was a mistake.
Yes, but a few times you said that it's an impression, that it's living in the European leaders' minds. What about the option if that's the idea, to make an impression, and then if something worse is coming, to change this impression and to make the next step, which is more serious for everybody? Because I don't believe that, yes, France and Great Britain, they don't have a lot of troops, so they don't have ability to fight with Russia, but they have missiles like Russia, and the war with missiles is something absolutely different.
Yes, but what's also absolutely different is that compared to Russia, France and Britain are tiny places.
That's right.
Say, I think one Russian missile, which has many warheads, is sufficient to totally destroy Great Britain. Just one. And probably wouldn't take more than two to destroy France. So it's not a war they have any chance in. So, and why? Russia's not doing anything to Britain or France. It's doing nothing to them. What's it doing? Nothing. It's not made any threats. It's not imposed any sanctions. It's done nothing whatsoever. So what are Britain and France so worked up about Russia for? It makes no sense. In fact, it's insane. It's insane. They're making an enemy out of a country that can destroy them at its will, and they can't do anything about it. Why does Britain and France want Russia as an enemy? Makes no sense. None. So I think we come back to what you said previously. People don't have any sense. There's no intelligence.
There is no intelligence, but when I'm looking through the history, the close history over the last 10 years of political behavior of Britain, since we are speaking about, they made the Brexit. They didn't accept the euro, and after this they made the Brexit. That was very bad for the European Union. After this, it was a quiet moment, at least here in Europe. And right now, when the conflict is without or with less support from the United States, they are coming back. Are they the... very often we are hearing this, and so that's why I'm asking, are they the one of the players with the puppets on the world scene?
Europe has been the puppets. They have been American puppets. Trump has said he doesn't want them. He doesn't want NATO, he said. And so what this tells Europe is, hey, look, all of our system that makes us important and well provided with money, because, you know, the Americans give these leaders bagfuls of money. They're paid to be puppets. So, you know, where will all our millions come from? And who are we? I mean, all of a sudden, we're not important as American puppets. What's happening to our system? So their whole world is disintegrating under Trump as they see it. That's the way they see it. And so they've gotten very hostile to Trump because he's destroying all the arrangements that worked so well for them and provide them with money and influence and honors and the chance to be important and participate in discussions in the G7 and the G20 and all of these things that make up their life. And so they see Trump taking that away. So they're hostile. And maybe their hostility makes them even less capable of thought. Now, what could happen? Well, it's entirely possible that Trump, relying on coercion, it hasn't worked with China. It's not going to work with Russia, I don't think. Trump has already said if Putin doesn't accept a total ceasefire, it's more sanctions, more weapons to Ukraine. He's making threats to somebody that he's supposed to be negotiating an agreement with. Well, that's not a negotiated agreement. That's a coerced agreement. Now, can the Kremlin really allow Russia to be coerced by Washington and still have any self-respect, to still be trusted by the Russian people? I don't think so. So it could well be that all that will come out of the negotiations is to finally convince Putin and Lavrov that they can get nowhere negotiating with Washington. It's just not possible. You see, they should already know that. They should know that after the Minsk agreement. They should know that after the intense Russian effort by Putin and Lavrov in the winter from 2021 into 2022, you know, from December into February, the Russians were doing everything they could, meeting with Blinken, the American Secretary of State, with the EU, with NATO. They were pleading for a mutual security agreement, and they got a cold shoulder. That's the reason they had to enter Ukraine. Well, the Americans, Europe, they clearly preferred conflict to a settlement.
That's right.
Well, it's going to happen again. So how many times does it have to happen before Putin and Lavrov wake up? And so if it happens too many times, something really bad could happen that force Russia to respond militarily in a powerful way. Now, if Putin had won that war in a month, say, Russia would be regarded as a great power that you had to make an agreement with. Europe would be sitting there saying, ooh, boy, look at that. What chance would we have? None. The Americans would be saying, phew. And they would have come to an agreement.
Yeah, but after this, they will wake up and start to build a new army that will be stronger like the Russian. And the conflict will continue. Or not?
No. Because they would have seen determination, force, and an unwillingness to tolerate. You see, once again, Russia hasn't threatened anyone.
That's
They
true.
haven't threatened the United States. They haven't threatened anybody. Nobody. They really haven't even threatened Ukraine because Putin said, we're only going into Donbass. We're going in to save the Russians in Donbass. We're not invading Ukraine. He has not fought this war as if it were an invasion of Ukraine.
That's right. You have said a few times that Europe wanted this war, Ukraine wanted this war. This is something that we have seen over the last 400 years a few times. The West to go on a march to the East. The end of the story is all the time the same. The question is, why is this happening on every 100 years?
Well, I don't think it's a cycle. It just
happening
happened
like this.
It just Napoleon got carried away with his power. Hitler got carried away with his power. And I think the West has got carried away with its power and has been encouraged to do so by Putin's non-response. So, all of Putin's red lines meant nothing. They were all abandoned. Every red line he announced meant nothing. And so the West concludes he's not resolute. Russia's not militarily a problem. So, and Putin keeps talking about their weapons, but the West doesn't care because the West doesn't think they'll use them. So this is the problem. I think Putin has mishandled it. He was afraid that if he was decisive and used force, it would block his ability to negotiate a great power agreement. In my opinion, it would have vastly increased his ability to enforce a great power agreement. After all, it was the Red Army that convinced Churchill and Roosevelt that the Soviet Union was a great party, a great power.
Everything that you said about Putin and his way of thinking and postponing...
He is a 19th century naive Western liberal. That's what Putin is.
And what does it mean for his career from now on?
The West will continue to take advantage of him. Of his trust, of his good intentions, of his effort to negotiate. They'll continue to take advantage of him. Look, we already see within the Trump administration conflict arising about, can we trust Russia? How can we make an agreement with Russia? How can we trust them? No, we can't. So it's going to be very difficult. Look, the Americans, ever since 1950, the Cold War began, the Americans have been trained for decades to see Russia as an enemy. Why?
They need an enemy.
The military security complex needs an enemy. Yes. CIA needs an enemy, the Pentagon needs an enemy, the Air Force, the Navy, the military contractors, the armaments producers, and I think the American people need an enemy. They need to feel like somebody's after them, and so they have to be strong. And they get a certain amount of emotional satisfaction out of being strong. And that emotional satisfaction is important. And so Russia fills all those roles. It's unfortunate that Russians don't realize that.
But who's the real enemy? Because of the second part we have spoke more about the real war, but the economic war, the social war, all these conflicts that are on different levels all over the world. Who's the real enemy here?
That's a good question. There may be many real enemies. You know, the main trouble in the United States is the influence the German cultural Marxists have had on people's belief. They've eroded the belief system. You know, we have a system where people they don't even acknowledge biological reality. A man can declare himself to be a woman can declare herself to be a man. And so if biological science is erased, you just look at the damage just from that alone. So the United States has lost its belief system. It's been beat up and destroyed year by year, decade by decade. We have a situation today where journalists are taught in American universities. Their function is not to report the news or to get the facts. Their function is to overthrow society, to change society by how they create narratives.
To manipulate.
To manipulate, yeah. And the law schools are taught the same thing. Your job is not to find the law, to defend justice. Your job is to use law to overthrow the society, to overthrow its institutions. Well, we don't even have an educated class that's committed to the United States. They're committed to overthrowing it. So, you know, that's one form of conflict. And a country that's got that kind of internal conflict, how in the world is it going to have military conflict with Russia and China and Iran when it's taught all the young people in the school that the United States is racist and misogynist and evil and exploitative? Where do you get the army for? What motivates the army? You know, it's like you say, there's so many layers of just total destruction operating. You know, just the character of people is deteriorating. Just to find ethical people with integrity, this is disappearing. So it's all kinds of wild cards there, and it's not like past times. And even in past times when countries had unity, they believed in themselves, they had well-educated, intelligent leaders, they still made disastrous mistakes. Europe went to 2 great wars. It destroyed Europe. It destroyed European civilization. So even when things are working on most levels, humans are capable of producing utter destruction.
Yes.
When nothing is working anywhere on any level, just imagine what can come out of it. the worst kinds of horrors. So that is the situation. I think you summed it up very well when you spoke of the many levels of conflict and chaos. And that's what we have. All of Europe is in chaos. If you look at it, can you identify, I don't know about Bulgaria, but other than Hungary, can you identify one government that represents the ethnic basis of the country?
No, unfortunately, no. And even if there is a single spark of hope in some country, people doesn't believe anymore that this is a pure person. Everything is ruined, and it reminds me sometimes of the end of the Roman Empire, like other empires. It's falling down, and nothing can stop this self-destruction.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
That's right. And any political leader who tries to represent the ethnic basis of the country, like Marine Le Pen, they put in prison. They put you in. She's got the largest political representation in the French Parliament, and she's going to prison because she stands up for French people.
It will happen with others if they appear.
It's the same everywhere except Hungary. And I think that Orban is in danger of assassination.
Absolutely, yes, that's right. And also Fico in Slovakia.
Yeah.
They have tried already once and didn't succeed, but they will try again. Mr. Roberts, we have made 32 minutes. It was like a blink of an eye. Thank you very much for this conversation once again. I hope that we are going to make others also. The things that we are speaking here are not very polite for the ears of some people, but they're our truth and we need to protect them. So that's why thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you for your interest. I agree with you. People need to have a better understanding of what is happening and what they confront.
What they confront. Yes, that's right. Once again, thank you very much. Уважаеми зрители, това беше предаването конкретно за тази седмица и разговорът ни с господин Робъртс. Надявам се, че ще направим и други такива, просто защото е необходимо. Ще се видим отново следващата седмица.